They told her no. But when Dr. Avery Lane, a once-renowned trauma surgeon, received the letter postmarked from Gracehill Sanitarium abandoned since 1983, something inside her twitched awake. It wasn't grief, not guilt. It was unfinished business. The envelope was brittle and yellow, sealed with red wax in the shape of an inverted cross. The message inside was brief. Room B113 has been opened. You must come back. They remember you. Gracehill had been closed for 4 decades after a fire allegedly claimed the lives of 42 patients and 5 staff members in one night. But the official death toll never matched the rumors. They said people saw eyes in the flames, figures in the windows, and that screams continued long after the building was evacuated. Avery didn't just work there, she survived it. And for 40 years, she'd never spoken of what she saw in Ward B. On the night she returned, the rain didn't fall, it poured sideways. Lightning cracked across the Appalachian sky as she parked near the ruined facility, its skeletal frame looming like a forgotten cathedral. Gracehill sat like a corpse, trying to remember how to breathe. As Avery approached, the front doors, barricaded by the state, were already open. Inside, the air was still and rancid, like meat left in the sun. Her flashlight flickered violently as she stepped over shattered glass and mold-blackened tiles. Her breath fogged, and she could feel the pressure like walking into a room already full of watchers. She passed the old waiting area, where wheelchairs were overturned, and clipboards still hung mid-sentence. She reached the main hallway. A massive bloodstain streaked across the floor, trailing into the darkness. But it hadn't dried. It was still wet. She crouched beside it. A whisper hissed from the far end of the hall. "Don't touch that. It's ours now." She stood slowly. That voice, she recognized it. It belonged to a patient who died in the fire. Only, no one ever told her how he died. Room B113 was at the end of the east wing, past the burned-out surgical theater. As she moved down the hallway, her flashlight beam caught something in the corner. A child's handprint on the wall, too high for a child to reach, and upside down. The hallway turned cold. So cold that frost formed on the glass of an old observation window. Behind it, in the psych evaluation room, a figure stood, still, watching. Avery froze. The figure wasn't visible directly, only in the reflection of her flashlight's beam against the glass. It wore a patient's gown, blood soaking the fabric. No eyes, no lips, just skin sewn tight over the face. And it was tapping on the inside of the glass. Tap, 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 slow, rhythmic, like a countdown. Room B113's door was warped and burned, but it opened with a soft click, like it had been waiting for her. Inside, the walls were covered in charcoal, scribbles, thousands of them, spirals, eyes, words and languages she didn't recognize. And in the center of the room sat a gurney. On it was a body bag. It moved, not violently, not unnaturally, but gently, as if something inside had just shifted. Her hand reached for the zipper against her will. To make it not. Wasn't a corpse. It was her, pale, eyes open, mouth agape, and her own voice gasped. He's still here, and he wants out. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her. The walls pulsed, and the symbols began to glow faintly red. The lights overhead buzzed, and then exploded. The floor cracked beneath her feet, tanned from below. Rose a sound she'd heard only once. The chant from the night of the fire. not English, not Latin, a tongue older than time, spoken in wet, sucking syllables. The gurney erupted in flames, but her body did not burn. It sat upright, turned its head, and smiled, and in its voice and hers combined, it whispered, "Now the ward is open again. Now the ward is open again." The door wouldn't. Avery slammed her shoulder against it, again and again, but it was like trying to knock down a concrete wall with her bare hands. The hinges didn't even creak. The lock had vanished entirely. No knob, no latch, just solid, rotting wood that pulsed warm under her palms. She was trapped. Behind her, the gurney that had held her corpse self was now empty. The body was gone, but the mirror on the far wall, the one cracked through the middle, was not empty. It reflected the room just as it was, except there were people in the reflection. Dozens of them. Patients in tattered gowns stood silently, pressed to the walls, their eyes gouged out or sewn shut, their mouths trembling open in soundless screams. Their shadows twitched on the floor, moving on their own, dancing like broken puppets. Avery turned. The room was still empty, but the mirror remained filled. They never left. Came a voice from inside her head. Only the living forget. She backed away from the mirror as one of the reflected patients stepped forward. Its face was half skull, half flesh, teeth clicking as it raised a skeletal hand and pointed dot at her. Avery screamed as the mirror shattered inward with a deafening crash. She blinked. The room was gone. She was standing in Ward B's hallway, but it was no longer abandoned. The lights buzzed overhead. The floor gleamed. Voices echoed down the corridor. A nurse passed by, her cap askew, pushing a cart of meds. It was 1983, the night of the fire. Avery turned and saw herself younger, confident, alive, speaking to a man in restraints. His eyes were all black. No whites, no irises, just darkness. He sat still, smiling, even as he bled from the nose and fingertips. "You shouldn't be in here, Dr. Lane," he said, with a thick, otherworldly calm. "It's not your ward. Not anymore." The younger Avery didn't answer. She just reached for a syringe and injected him. With a snap, the vision vanished. The hallway returned to rot and ruin. The air was choked with mildew and old smoke. Water dripped from a broken pipe. The lights were dead again, but footsteps echoed in the distance. Slow, dragging. Avery turned off her flashlight. She crouched behind a rusted medication cart, holding her breath. From the end of the hallway came a figure, shambling with an unnatural gait. It was wearing a charred security uniform. Its skin was flaking ash. Its jaw hung open unnaturally, bones poking through. One eye was melted shut. The other glowed red. It stopped, sniffed the air like a dog. "She's back," it wheezed. "He'll want her in the red room?" Avery backed away slowly, stepping over a fallen IV pole, but the pole scraped the tiles loudly. The figure jerked toward the sound and began running. Avery sprinted the other way, her shoes skidding on blood-slicked tile. Doors on either side of the hallway slammed shut as she passed, trapping her inside a corridor that was twisting, warping. The lights above pulsed red, like a heartbeat. She turned left, then right, then stopped. She was back in front of room B113, but this time, the door opened for her. Inside, the walls had changed. Now they were lined with photos, hundreds of them, all of her. Some from her childhood, some from her time at Gracehill, some from places she'd never been. One showed her dead in a bathtub, her wrists slit. Another showed her screaming as fire surrounded her. Another was of her, now, standing in room B113, except it had been taken from behind her. She spun. Nothing there. Then came the rattling. The bed frame in the center of the room jerked violently, as though someone was having a seizure on top of it. The lights flickered. Something began crawling out from under the bed. First a hand, skinless, fingernails long and black. Then a face, mouth split ear to ear, full of tiny, writhing teeth. Avery stepped back, but the room stretched behind her like elastic. The door was miles away now. The creature dragged itself fully into view. It was wearing a lab coat. Her lab coat. It stood up, its head jerking like a marionette. "You treated the body," it whispered in her voice, "but you never healed the soul." Then it screamed, a bone-ripping, glass-shattering howl. Avery bolted. She didn't know how she got out, only that her feet were bleeding, her breath sharp and broken, her hands trembling as she stumbled into the old morgue beneath the building. The mortuary doors groaned open. Inside, rows of cold storage drawers lined the walls. Most were ajar, as though the bodies inside had already left. The smell was unbearable. Rot, rust, and something older, something spiritual. At the far end of the room was an examination table. On it lay a corpse, covered in a white sheet. The tag on the toe said, "Avery Lane. Time of death, 11:49 p.m. October 17th, 1983. She pulled the sheet back. The corpse opened its eyes. "They said you could leave, but you didn't. Leave, but you didn't." The corpse still stared at her. Its skin was waxy and gray, but the eyes were unmistakable. Her eyes, they shimmered with a cold intelligence, filled with blame and warning. Avery staggered backward, knocking over a tray of rusted scalpels that clattered across the floor like thrown bones. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "You died, Avery," the corpse said calmly, "but you didn't cross." The voice didn't come from its mouth. It echoed from the walls, from the metal drawers, from the vents, as if the morgue itself was speaking. "You thought the fire was the end, but it was only the beginning." Suddenly, the overhead lights exploded, one by one, until the morgue was plunged into blood-red emergency glow. The cold storage drawers slammed open, and from them crawled the long-forgotten patients of Gracehill. Their bones cracked as they moved. Their mouths were sewn shut, but they moaned all the same. Flesh sloughed from limbs. Eyeless sockets stared at her. Avery turned to run, but the corpse grabbed her wrist. Its touch was like a lightning bolt of ice and pain. "You need to see what really happened in the red room," and the floor collapsed beneath her. She fell, not down, but backward. Suddenly, she was in a hallway, unfamiliar and somehow older than the rest of the hospital. The walls were brick and stone, not sterile tile. Candles lined the passage in black iron sconces, their flames swaying though there was no wind. Symbols were etched into the bricks. Strange spirals, claw-like letters in a forgotten language, and a recurring image, a goat skull with 3 eyes. At the end of the corridor stood a heavy iron door. No knob, no hinges, only a sigil painted in blood. It opened for her. Inside was a circular chamber, domed like a tomb. Stone slabs ringed the walls, and ancient hospital gurneys had been converted into altars. Shackles hung from the ceiling. The stench of burnt bone filled the air, and in the center of the floor, a pentagram carved into the cement, pulsing with wet black liquid. Avery froze. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real memory. She saw herself, younger again, standing at the edge of the symbol. Around her stood 3 men in white coats. Her colleagues, doctors. Dr. Harrow, Dr. Singer, Dr. March. They wore surgical masks and bone necklaces, one by one. They sliced their palms and let the blood fall into the center. "One to bind," Harrow intoned. "One to open. One to sacrifice." Young Avery stepped forward and injected the patient lying inside the symbol, the same man from before, the one with black eyes. He arched his back violently, howling in a voice that didn't belong to any human. "Let him in," she whispered to herself, watching. "You did?" came the answer from behind. She turned. The modern, present-day red room was now rotted and real. Candles still burned in impossible pools of wax. The symbol glistened again on the floor, and something crawled from its center. It was not a man, not anymore. Its bones cracked in reverse as it stood upright. Its mouth split open wide enough to reveal a second set of teeth beneath. Eyes popped open along its spine, each blinking in different directions. It wore a doctor's coat. Hers. Avery Lane. It hissed. Your heart was once my gate. Your guilt keeps it open. She screamed and backed away, but the door slammed shut. Chains fell from the ceiling and wrapped around her wrists and ankles, lifting her from the floor. You were supposed to bring more, but you fled. The candles flared black. The room shook, and behind the creature, others arrived. Doctors, nurses, patients, all with no eyes, their heads bowed, chanting in voices not their own. They formed a circle. The ritual had begun. Again suddenly, a voice shouted above the din. Dr. Lane. It was James, the young investigator who had found her case file. She didn't know how he'd gotten in, but there he was, standing in the doorway with a flare and a crowbar in hand. Move, he shouted, hurling the flare at the creature. It screamed and recoiled, smoke pouring from its flesh. James rushed in, breaking the chains with heavy strikes. Avery fell hard onto the stone, coughing blood, her head spinning. How did you know? Time. We have to go. They ran, but the red room didn't let them go easily. The walls shifted and melted. The hallway became a maze, reshaping with each step. Screams echoed. Doors slammed. The floor buckled. Avery turned a corner and found herself alone. Again, James was gone, and she was standing in a hallway that wasn't part of the hospital. It looked like a home, her home, the one from childhood. The lights flickered, and in the shadows, she saw her mother, hunched in the corner, whispering something over and over. You always brought the darkness with you, Avery. Darkness with you, Avery. This was her old house, the one in Black Hollow where she grew up, where silence hung heavier than air, where her mother locked the doors from the outside, where the basement was always cold, no matter the season. But it couldn't be real. That house had been torn down 10 years ago after a fire, and yet, here it was, exactly as she remembered it. Peeling wallpaper, sagging ceiling, and the smell of burnt wood and rosewater, her mother's scent. A flicker of movement. She turned. There, at the end of the hallway, was a figure standing in front of the cracked mirror. Her mother, or what used to be her. I told you never to come back, Avery. Her voice was layered, like many speaking through one mouth. Her hair hung in tangled knots, and her dress was soaked with something thick and dark. Her hands trembled, fingers blackened and long like dried twigs. You opened the door then. You're doing it again now. What door? Avery whispered, shaking. The one inside you. Suddenly, Avery was pulled toward the mirror. Her body moved against her will, gliding across the warped wood floor until she stood face to face with her reflection. But it wasn't her reflection. It was the other Avery, the one from the slab, pale, bruised, hollow-eyed. The reflection smiled, then slammed her hands against the glass, cracking it. Behind it was a different world, a room where the walls bled, where children cried from unseen corners, where the floor was made of teeth, a room that should never exist in this world or any other. Avery screamed, but the mirror shattered, and she fell through. She landed hard on cold tile. The air smelled like iron and sulfur. The walls were slick and pulsing, as if made of something alive. The overhead lights flickered with a sick yellow glow. She was back in Gracehill, but not any part. She remembered. This place was deeper, older. The ceilings were lower, the halls more narrow, with crude carvings gouged into the brick, tally marks, teeth, and endless spirals. A whisper followed her. We never left. You did. It echoed in every hallway, in every pipe. She stumbled forward, barefoot now. Her hospital shoes were gone. Her clothes were thin and torn. Down the hallway, a door creaked open by itself. She stepped through. Inside was a long, low room with a circle of wheelchairs and something sitting in each one. Rotting patients, dozens of them, strapped in place, blindfolded, their mouths sewn shut, as Avery passed. Their heads snapped toward her, one by one. She tried not to scream, then she saw it. In the center of the room was a large metal operating table. Upon it sat an open medical journal, her own, and next to it, a tape recorder. She pressed play. Patient number 119. Test subject designated black mouth. Subject exhibits signs of pre-death cognition, capable of speaking in dead languages, and shows reaction to ritual symbols. It was her voice. From 10 years ago. We will attempt neural gateway stimulation using blood sigils derived from the red codex. The voice cracked with excitement and something darker. If successful, we will open a direct channel through the human mind into the negative plane. Click. Avery backed away, mouth trembling. She had done this. She had opened something behind her. One of the wheelchair patients let out a long, slow moan, and the stitches over its mouth burst open. Still hungry, it said in a wet rasp, then another, still listening, and another, still inside. Their blindfolds fell away, and from their sockets spilled black worms. Slithering toward her across the floor, she ran. She burst through a rusted door and slammed it shut, heart hammering. Breath ragged. It was a stairwell, at least. It looked like one. She climbed, each step groaning beneath her weight. Halfway up, she heard footsteps above her, slow, deliberate. She called out, "James." Silence. Then a voice, low, broken, inhuman. "You can't climb out of this." The walls of the stairwell began to melt, revealing bones behind them. Dozens of faces pushed through the concrete, mouths open in silent screams. Avery collapsed at the landing, covering her ears, and then a hand grabbed hers. She looked up. James, bloodied, coughing, eyes wide with terror. "We have to go now. I found a way out. There's a tunnel under the west wing. But we don't have long. Something's following me." "What did you see?" she asked as they moved. "I saw the records." "Avery," he stopped her. "There were never any patients in the red room." "What are you talking about? The records are blank. Every name, every chart, every signature, dozens of rituals, but no living patients. Only names of the dead." Avery's blood ran cold. "We weren't healing people, were we?" James looked at her with haunted eyes. "You weren't working on patients. You were working on hosts. You were working on hosts." James, in a winding corridor behind the collapsed surgical wing, one he said had appeared only in dreams before. Now it was real, tangible, dusty from disuse but thrumming with something beneath the surface. The walls were cracked, open like old bone, veins of rust and dried blood weaving across them. No doors, no signs, only a narrow spiral staircase at the end, heading down deeper than the basement should go. Avery hesitated. This wasn't on the original blueprint. James glanced at her, voice shaking. "That's because it wasn't. Built by men." They descended in silence. The walls grew darker, wet. A foul, meaty rot filled the air, like decomposing pigs and sulfur. With each step, the light dimmed until they reached a chamber, lit only by flickering red sigils carved into the stone itself. At the center was a massive iron door, covered in human handprints, some child-sized, others inhumanly long, all burned into the metal. James handed Avery an old, rusted key. "You carried it for years, around your neck. I found it in your file, the one marked, sealed access only." She stared at it, trembling. The key felt warm in her hand as she placed it in the lock. A whisper crawled through her skull. "Let me in again." The door opened with a shudder, releasing a gust of air, hot as breath, wet as blood. Inside, the walls were covered in sheets of human skin, stretched, taut, and pinned like canvas, each etched with strange glyphs. Dozens of them, some recent. One had her own handwriting. "Gateway stable. Host survived 7 minutes." Visuals include fragmented shapes, multiple faces, sound distortion, Subject number 14 mentioned the girl in mirrors. James found a projector on the far wall. When he turned it on, it whirred to life, casting a blurry image on the skin. Footage played. Black and white, grainy, security camera. It showed Avery younger, more confident, standing over a strapped-down patient. She whispered something inaudible, then sliced a symbol into the patient's forehead. The moment she finished, the body convulsed violently. The screen flickered. Suddenly, the face changed. It wasn't the patient anymore. It was her own face. Screaming. The screen went black. Then a phrase appeared, scratched onto the film itself. The door is the self. James backed away from the wall. You weren't just studying patience. You were experimenting with possession. You were letting something use them, speak through them. That's what the hell word was. No, Avery muttered. We were trying to access another plane, a realm of pure thought, but something came back with us. Suddenly, a deep, wet clicking sound echoed from the hall behind them, like bone on bone. Then, a voice, not loud, not human, but inside their heads. I remember her. The skin on the walls began to tremble. The glyphs glowed, turning from red to black. James screamed and fell to the floor, clutching his head. It's in me. I can hear it. Oh God. It's using my voice. And then he spoke, but it wasn't James anymore. Avery, you wore me like a lab coat. Now, I wear your friends. His jaw unhinged. His spine arched. Something slithered out of his throat, black, wet, and whispering. In reverse, Avery grabbed a nearby scalpel and slashed it in panic, cutting the thing mid-. It hissed, spraying her face with steaming black fluid. James collapsed. He was breathing, but barely. The whispers intensified, bouncing around the chamber, folding over one another like overlapping screams. I never left the ward. She brought me out. She was the first door. Avery knew what had to be done. In the center of the room was a drain, surrounded by more bone-carved symbols, the original summoning point. She stepped into the middle, pulled up her sleeve, and carved the symbol that started it all into her own arm. The room shuddered. A wind, but without direction, began to howl. The glyphs ignited, turning the room into a strobe of red and black. And then, it appeared. A creature. No, a presence stepped through the air itself. Its face was a mass of human mouths, constantly muttering every secret Avery ever kept. Its body was stitched together from every patient she had failed, every host she had shattered, every guilt, every regret, flesh made from memory. It towered over her. She didn't run. She stepped forward. Take me back. Seal the door. You don't belong here. The mouths laughed. You never closed it, Doctor. You just walked away. It opened a massive jaw, and Avery stepped into it. She didn't scream, not even when the world flipped inside out and she was dragged through a tunnel made of memory, stitched together by screams and prayers. Every room she ever entered, every patient she ever touched, now rotting in reverse. Then silence. Total, absolute, unnatural silence. And a single heartbeat. Avery opened her eyes. She was lying in a hospital bed, back in dries, overhead. Machines beeping steadily. Clean linens. But she knew this wasn't her world anymore. A nurse entered the room, eyes too wide, smile too still. Welcome back, Dr. Voss. We've been expecting you. Behind her, the hallway breathed, and somewhere, in the distance, the ward door creaked open again. Gracehill looked. Everything was wrong. Too quiet. Too clean. Nurses walked in perfect synchrony. The light never flickered. There were no patients in the beds. Every room Avery passed was empty, except for the faint echo of voices behind the walls, whispering in her own voice. She walked down the hallway in her hospital gown, barefoot, heart pounding. Welcome back, Dr. Voss. The voice came from every intercom at once, male, and female, human and not. It spoke in chorus, like it was mimicking a hospital rather than being one. Your shift never ended. As Avery passed the nurse's station, she saw a clipboard. Her name was on it. Next to it, a list of patients, but they were all deceased, including herself. Time of death, 3:14 a.m. Cause, internal cerebral rupture following exposure to hostile entity. She backed away and slammed right into someone. A tall man in surgical scrubs, except his mask was stitched into his face, and his eyes were completely black. Code black in Ward X, he rasped. You're needed, doctor. Before she could run, 2 more orderlies grabbed her, wheeling her down the corridor on a gurney. She thrashed, screamed. The hallway stretched as they moved, growing darker, longer, the lights dimming into red. They turned a final corner and stopped at a set of familiar steel doors. Ward X, its sign hung crooked, soaked in some black fluid that smelled like scorched hair. The moment the doors opened, a wave of screams crashed over her, hundreds, thousands layered on top of each other like a choir of the damned dot inside. The ward was now a single enormous room with no ceiling. Instead of beds, there were hanging slabs of meat, swaying slowly in the air, each one twitching, whispering, some praying backwards in Latin. In the center of the room was a surgical table. Avery was strapped to it. The lights above her blinked, not from electricity, but from the eyes embedded in the ceiling. A shadow moved into her view, herself, older, eyes pitch black, face stretched into an expression of infinite calm. Welcome back, her double said. It's time for your final extraction. Avery shook her head, tears streaming. I closed the door. I sacrificed myself. You can't keep me here. Her double smiled. You didn't close the door. You were the door. The walls peeled back like skin, revealing observers behind mirrored glass. Doctors, nurses, patients, all versions of her, watching, judging, documenting. A red light blinked. On above her. Recording started. Her double held a scalpel above her chest. Let's open you up, she screamed as the blade touched her skin. And in that moment, that sliver of agony, she remembered something. Not a memory, a warning. The first patient, the little girl with the burned mouth. Don't listen to the version of you that smiles. That one lies. Avery twisted her head to the side, saw the mirrored wall, and for the first time, looked directly at the real her. Not the smiling double, not the calm one, but the broken, shaking, guilty version, the one who never stopped hearing. The voices. Avery whispered, I choose you. The mirror shattered. Everything collapsed. She woke up in fire. The real Gracehill burned around her, walls blackened, air thick with smoke and screams. Alarms blared in chaos. Bodies, real ones, lined the hallway. Nurses clawed at their own faces. Orderlies ran, howling gibberish. Patients crawled on the floor, eyes gouged out, laughing. The surgical ward was gone, only rubble and a deep pit. Where it once stood, from the pit came a sound like infinite breathing. Avery staggered toward it, her body half burned, her mind barely holding on. She looked down into the darkness, where the real creature pulsed, massive and ancient, still tethered to the hospital by guilt, sin, and unfinished rituals. It spoke with every voice she'd ever known. You can't escape what you opened. You can only finish it. She took one step forward. The flames curled around her, and she jumped in. No one knows what happened that night at Gracehill Memorial. The fire department found no signs of arson. All 34 patients and 9 staff members perished. The hospital was condemned and bulldozed a year later. But in the ashes of the surgical wing, investigators found something buried deep beneath the rubble, a rusted key, and carved into the wall behind it, barely visible through the soot. We never closed the door. We never closed the door.